Good morning, everybody. We are live for NFL week number 14 here on the Right Angle Sports YouTube channel. Good to have everybody back here for another week of NFL discussion on the show. In this episode, as always, we'll be talking about every single game on the week 14 card. We'll talk about every side. We'll talk about every total. We'll squeeze in a few props when we can, and we'll get you prepared for everything coming up on the game on Sunday. If you're watching this live, good to have you back for another week. If you are watching this after the show has already aired, want to remind you that down below in the timeline of the video, there'll be timestamps included. So if you're watching this on a Friday, you want to jump ahead to the Sunday games, you can slide the bar down below to the game that you want. There's also timestamps with each game listed down below in the description. So if you want to jump ahead to get my thoughts and any questions and answers that might be associated to a specific game, you can select that game down below, and you'll get hopefully all of the information that you need to help you make a bet on that game. Do a couple good mornings here. Murray back for another show. DB in for a listen live. Guessing a couple comments came through and says, hey, I was busy with work. I haven't been able to catch it live. I've been watching after. So a couple folks jumping in. We see James in the Midwest. Here we go. Scatman as well. Finally catching this live. Everybody takes December off, apparently. Work slows down. People have a little more time to discuss football on the Wednesday morning at 9:15 a.m. Good morning to Devin. Matt back for another show. Same thing with Michael. Another Michael as well. Lots of Michaels, as always, in the chat. Let's start with an update on what is most important right now beyond the NFL. We are looking at the bowl service over on the RAS Picks website, raspicks.com/CFB. We gave out our first bowl release yesterday. There's going to be at least 9 more to come, and this price prorates down as you're looking at it. So now it's $356 for the 9 plays, as it is a proportional reduction for that. And so if you want to jump over to raspicks.com/CFB, you can get into the service. You can join for the bowl releases. Those will be going out sporadically over the next few days. So much going on with the transfer portal, team switching. Guys are constantly on calls behind the scenes working to figure it all out. Yesterday's price, you're already way ahead with that number that you were able to bet yesterday with the first release. And the anticipation is that these are going to be continuing to move pretty crazy for the next couple of weeks as we get closer to kickoff. So if you want to get ahead with the number of bowl releases, raspicks.com/CFB. Todd Tracy working from home. It has its privileges. I like to see that as well. Moshi says, hoping Detroit Mercy plus 1.5 as a winner, referencing the college basketball free release over on VSiN this morning. Connor brings up, you moved to a new perspective. So rearrange the office a little bit, getting a little heavy in my elder years here. I had to get on the running routine, and so moved the treadmill into the office. 5-day streak currently active, and so I'm trying to do 100 days in a row. Get the old heart and gut in a spot that's a much better situation than what I'm dealing with at the moment, as we're getting a little bit too wide in certain spots for the age at the moment. So rearrange things. So that's why shelves are kind of back behind. Going to stick with this for the rest of the season. And then on the other side, have the treadmill with the TV, and doing a little bit of movement as we're watching NFL on Sundays as well. So trying to tighten it up a little bit, to put it lightly. So that's why we're seeing a little bit of a different background going forward. Before we get into the too high, too low, would be doing myself a disservice if I did not look back on where things were 13 days ago. For those of you who listen to the podcast, you'll know December 6th, kind of a special day within my life as I think back in my sort of journey throughout sports betting and my career. And it always makes me laugh to look back when I think about December 6th, 2010, which was my first job, we'll call it. And perhaps people don't know from the show, or maybe they're new, but I wanted to just bring this up for those of you who may not know. But in December 6th, 2010, first job in Port of Spain, Trinidad and Tobago as an 18-year-old. I always think it's a funny story. Rolled into Port of Spain, Trinidad and Tobago for my first ever job. And that was at the Palms Private Members Club in Port of Spain, right downtown in Maraval. And if we look at this beauty, so when I was pitched the job living in the Dominican Republic on my own, I was promised a casino with a big sports book. And as you can see in the middle of the screen there, that Palms sign, the green one, represented the private members club that I was promised was a Vegas-style casino. And it's right on top of the Burger King, if you can't see that fully. And this was a hotel complex. And the reason that they had it on the second floor was because you had to go up this weird flight of stairs. And so it was a security measure so nobody could rob the place, because there was a singular hallway that went down the corridor of the second floor of the hotel. So if you're trying to rob the place, not only did you have to go up a flight of stairs and make it through the hallway to begin with and then get through the doors, but on your way out, you had to make it down the same hallway and down the same flight of stairs. So if someone was trying to rob the place, they just had it sealed off. Nobody could get in or out. And so this is where I started working as an odds maker. And of course, many of you would have seen the picture where I had the attire. And part of the reason I went intentionally casual today is this was what I thought was the right thing to wear to work at my first job when I was 18, working in that private members club. And it gives me a bit of pride, but also a bit of humor and comedy to look back, see now still at it 13 years later in a much different fashion, but now wearing a hoodie, sharing NFL thoughts with each and every one of you, instead of wearing whatever the hell this is, thinking that it was a good idea, standing in front of a whiteboard where I wrote odds for games in a dry erase marker. And that was a whiteboard installed just to the right of me. There was a blackjack table and a Rum 32 table that was sitting in the corner. Rum 32 is a popular card game that they play in casinos in Port of Spain and across Trinidad. And so people would be sitting down at the blackjack table or the roulette table. And I had this whiteboard with masking tape because I thought it was a good idea. And I would handwrite tickets on paper and I would have the odds and marker. And so as people would bet, I would go and I would switch the odds and marker with the dry erase pen. And I would take bets from these people sitting at the blackjack table or the Rum 32 table or the roulette table. And I would handwrite the tickets on a white sheet of paper, a yellow sheet of paper, and a pink sheet. And I give them the white sheet. I'd put the yellow in the cage, and then I would keep the pink sheet so I could do all the figures at the end of the night. Went horribly wrong, as you can see, for many reasons why that didn't work. Lasted about 6 months at the position before said, like, okay, sports betting's not going to work here. But certainly takes me back to see 13 years ago sitting at that as well. John Lim says, December 2010, you're 18 years old. That means you're still 31. Still 31, but have the body shape and health profile of about a 50-year-old at this point going on right now. So yes, still at 31. I've been at this now in one way or the other for 16 or 17 years beyond that too. So been around a long time, but yes, still 31 years old. Connor says, hope next week's show will be live from the treadmill. Don't see that happening anytime. Murray says, just missing the cigar. I mean, the idea of what a bookmaker was in my mind was like a scene from Goodfellas, hence the whiteboard that I put up there as well. So took a couple minutes away to just kind of bring back and reminisce on that one, because it is December 6th, and that was the first day that I started 13 years ago. How many batteries did that tie take? Yeah, it's a good one on the rack going around. Good joke here, staying alive from Comet 52. But yeah, that was a fun journey for sure that started 13 years ago on this day. All right, let's get to what everybody is here for this morning and talk about too high, too low within the market ratings that we are looking at over at Unpredictable. And we'll keep this one a little bit quick, as it is a little bit more difficult today. And there's a lot of things I want to talk to about the games as well when we're looking at the market ratings here as a whole. Last week, pointed out the Tennessee Titans potentially too low, and they had every chance in the world to come away a victor against the Indianapolis Colts with multiple punt blocks. You have the Stonehouse injury. You have all of those late game shenanigans that went against the Titans. So I still think that maybe they're a hair short at 24. In terms of teams that have been bumped up or teams that have changed, we actually didn't see a lot, but you guys know exactly where I'm going with this. Too high. There's only one logical answer. LA Rams at 11. That game against the Cleveland Browns was inflated quite a bit late with those two late scores. That was not a runaway effort from LA. 13th on offense, 16th on defense, 11th overall. The LA Rams are not the 11th best team in the NFL. I think everybody's going to point out the Chargers at 9th. I get it. I could see how that would be fair 2. In terms of underrated, I think the Eagles are getting fringe underrated territory at the moment at 7th. This is the lowest we've seen them in a while. I think they're going to continue to slide a little bit. I think that is becoming a little bit too low. And so Rams overrated at 11th, Eagles too low at 7th. That's how I'd look at it. In the chat, Michael says Jags too low, Rams too high. Jacksonville, obviously 9th to 22nd, losing Trevor Lawrence. We'll talk about that a little bit. That's if Lawrence is unable to go, and there's differing opinions, I think that with Beathard, or hopefully they give Rourke a chance, a quarterback I really like at the 3rd string spot, also a fellow Canadian. 22nd is fair for what they have without Lawrence. Jay Karma says Miami too high. Interesting. Miami number 2 in the ratings. Interesting point there, Jay. Jets Pete says Seattle too high. Seattle currently listed at 13. Dream Crusher game is an interesting sentiment for sure. That was as good of a game as we've seen Geno play. See how Seattle can continue to trend. Garrett says Pittsburgh too high now at 15th. They actually dropped down from 13th. So I think they're probably getting into the range of properly rated or rated kind of just a little bit too high. So kind of agree with that sentiment. Jay Karma, Bill still getting respect, rightfully so. We'll talk about that game, absolutely. Arizona too low or Steelers too high? Wouldn't say Arizona is too low down at 31. That is a team with a defense that is going nowhere in a hurry and got a ton of benefit from that Steelers game and the weather and the delays, and obviously the injury to Kenny Pickett as well, which kind of put the Steelers in a weird spot with that one. Eagles too high. Devin says Browns too low. We're seeing that sentiment quite a bit. Garrett also Miami too high, easy schedule. Talk about the Miami stuff in a minute. I think that's really interesting too. We're also seeing Cleveland too low from Nathan, Buffalo too high. I do not agree with the Buffalo too high sentiment. That is a popular one I'm seeing within the chat. I don't buy that as well. John says Green Bay is going up. I think this is the peak and top for Green Bay personally at 12th. I think that that's too much. And then, again, a lot of Buffalo too high sentiment. I don't agree with the Bills being too high at 5th. I wouldn't put them below 7th, and I don't think you can drop them out much more. I think there's just a clear cutoff after 7 within the rating. San Francisco, Miami, Dallas, Kansas City, Buffalo, Baltimore, Philly. Those are the teams that can contend and compete for the Super Bowl. Those are the top 7. And the Bills are, in my opinion, that one team that's got it worse than all these other teams have that deserve to be in this spot. That's how I look at it overall. And think about the Bills. Like, imagine Buffalo sneaking in as because of the circumstances and their bad conference record. They get in and you have to face them wild card weekend. I mean, no team in the AFC wants that at all. So I agree with that for sure. That Buffalo belongs in that, and I do not think that they are overrated. Jay says Ravens dropped off a bit. Why? Bye week. And then again, these are all based on closing lines. So it's more other teams got bumped up because they played last week, and you see that adjustment. Baltimore will return back to where they are after this week as well. It just fluctuates a spot or two, which is why I only really look at when there's a big swing. That's when you look at that within the ratings. Otherwise, it's tends to reflect maybe just what other teams were doing against schedules and teams that they faced as well. Please, as we go, keep the questions coming in the live chat. I have a lot of things to talk about, a handful of games, and in a couple games this week, not a lot of thoughts to share. So we'll focus in on the good ones, and we might have a couple quick games in as we go through this. So we'll kind of keep it balanced as we go. Thursday night football, a thriller tomorrow. The Patriots on the road at the Pittsburgh Steelers. Pittsburgh, a 6-point favorite. Total in the game is 30. Not a lot that I can say here as a whole that's going to present an incredibly compelling argument. I like the Patriots here getting 6. If this number pushes up further, I still like New England getting more points than that. To me, when I look at both of these teams, you now have the trajectory the Steelers could have been heading on, which maybe is why people are coming with the sentiment that they were too high. Perhaps why we've seen them now downgraded last week, despite how that number ended up closing. Remember, it was Arizona money early. Late money was all validating Pittsburgh, bringing that number back. The Steelers had the chance to have this offensive reset where you have the new play caller coming in, you have Canada out, you were seeing different things within the passing game. There was a nice trajectory that they could have gone on, because the Steelers, when that happened, were a team that everybody wanted to fade. Everybody was looking for a spot to fade Pittsburgh, and that was really holding their price down quite a bit, because they were the team that was consistently being outgained. They were getting beat up in games, but still finding a way to win, right? So I thought it was a really interesting team to look at backing. Everybody wanted to fade. I thought there was going to be value with that, because the play caller switch was unrealized. Now I think that that's all derailed. Trubisky coming into that game against Arizona did not look like the Mitchell Trubisky interesting backup coming in that we've kind of had in our minds the last sort of like 2 seasons, basically. It just looked a lot different. And now it goes from knowing exactly what the system was, the new play caller Sullivan coming in, knowing what to fix it, to now this offense kind of has to change, because Trubisky's biggest asset is his mobility. And I don't know if the Steelers are going to be capable of pulling that off in this multiple week absence where Pickett's gone away. So the Steelers, to me, went from a team I wanted to back to a team I'm now looking at fading, where I think that the sentiment otherwise has kind of switched on it, where people see the uptick potential from Trubisky that I don't buy into. And so that is like a big change for me on Pittsburgh and how they're rated. And I think that they deserve to slide a little bit more. To me, the best unit in this game on either side of the football is the Patriots defense, which, while the Patriots have become a bit of a laughingstock as a team, the defense has continued to show up week after week after week as they've got more guys back. They suffered a few key injuries late September, early October. I think the best unit on the field in this game is the Patriots defense. And so with that, I'm now getting the Pats and 6 or potentially more, the way that this number is trending, against the Steelers team that I think is now going through their second offensive reset in 3 weeks. On the short week, I like that defense with the points in this position. If Pop Douglas plays, the Pats are interested. No interest if he's out. The concussion protocol is questionable at this point, the way that we've seen things change in the last couple of weeks. So I don't know what his status is going to be. I agree, if he is in, that makes it an even more valuable bet for sure. He's their best skill position player. He's their best wide receiver. The loss of Stevenson is a killer. The total's 30. I mean, you're not looking for a massive offensive output from the Pats. I get they can't score. CJ says it well. I mean, the offense is painful to watch, no matter who's at quarterback. I want to take the best unit on the field, which is the Pats defense, getting a handful of points against the Steelers offense, going through another reset, their second time in 3 weeks, with that changing for sure. So interesting. Zach Moss says Steelers defensive splits versus 12 personnel is poor. One angle for the Patriots to attack. That's an interesting point. Let's check it out. I actually have not looked at that, but let's look at it right now. Let's pull it up. Here is the Sports Info Solutions. Steelers defending 12 personnel, 21st or 26th in success rate, 21st in terms of usage that it has been run against them. So you're right in saying that the Steelers struggle against that. They're 26th. Let's look at the Pats really quickly on offense. Actually, did I have that flip? Let me see. Interesting. Okay. And then let's see what the Pats do with it. I think that's a good point. Their Patriots use it more than any other team in the league. They're 16th. So interesting angle there that we are seeing from that. So that's a path too, for sure, when you think about how the Patriots run. I want to take the better defense, getting 6 points in a total with 30. That's kind of the full extent of how I look at it for sure. Next game we have on the board as we move over to the Sunday card, Jags on the road at the Cleveland Browns. This is a mess for Jacksonville that is brewing. That loss against Cincinnati was an absolute killer because they had the driver's seat for the 1 seed with how that was being split. You look at their conference record, they had the tiebreaker, they had everything going their way. They have the Lawrence injury now, and I know that there's reports that are saying Lawrence is eligible to play on Sunday. I get there's 200 and some people on the stream right now. I can guarantee all 200 plus of you that were watching that game on Sunday, if I asked you before that tweet came out yesterday afternoon, you would have said that Lawrence has no chance to play in this game. And I don't know if that necessarily changes. I get that Peterson's trying to sort of play it both ways, so you kind of have the prep divided. The market is saying that Lawrence is not going to play. I don't anticipate the Browns prepping for Lawrence to play. I don't see it happening. Could be wrong. Speculation. It's a high ankle sprain. Typically, that is a multiple week designation that holds guys out. If Lawrence plays, I would call it the most impressive comeback from an injury on a single week that I have seen in a long time. And so I really think that this is the Browns versus CJ Beathard, with a very small chance that the best option the Jags have, which is Nathan Rourke, is able to play at quarterback. I think that that is where they should go, but I do think the Jags will start Beathard in this game. A couple of problems within this. First and foremost, the Jacksonville Jaguars have labeled Christian Kirk as their main skill position option against man coverage defenses. Doug Peterson has quotes about it. You look at the splits game by game, and it is consistently showing that Christian Kirk is the main option for the Jags when they are facing man coverage. The Cleveland Browns at home, obviously their defense has been a little bit better, but when we are, I'm stuck on market ratings. Give me 1 second. The Cleveland Browns play man coverage at the 4th highest rate. And so when I'm looking at this, as we pull it up on the screen right now, here's the Browns defense. We have man coverage at the bottom right here. 4th in their usage rate, number 1 in success rate against. The Browns are going to throw a ton of man coverage at CJ Beathard, at the Jags, and the Jags are going to have to find a way to navigate it without their best pass catching option in this. They're also going to have to find a way to navigate it with a banged up offensive line against the Browns defense that gets a ton of pressure. They're also going to have to find a way to navigate against it with ETN, who's dealing with a rib injury, which at the running back position on Monday night, we saw him struggle. His usage was limited because it was a spot where it's a running back dealing with that type of injury. Contact is going to sort of exaggerate the pain that he's dealing with. It's a pain tolerance issue. Like, all of the paths for the Jags to have offensive success with their guys are hurt or dealing with limitations, and they're facing a defense that matches up against them extremely well. And then we add in the fact that it's going to be a big weather game. We're expecting high winds. There's a high chance of rain. It's on the colder side. It's a mess for Jacksonville as that Florida team traveling up, and you have these Browns home-away defensive splits, which I thought was really schedule-induced, but honestly, there might be something to it when you look at how the Browns have been playing. One thing I'll point out is the Browns played well defensively against the Rams for 56 minutes. The last 4 minutes of the game, it was the Rams scoring twice off of really short fields. It was like a 20 and a 25-yard touchdown drive that showed 30-plus on the scoreboard. That was not a 30-plus output for the Rams in the true sense. The Browns defense played a lot better than that. And I think there's a lot of that noise within some of these road games. So to me in this, it's absolutely Cleveland or nothing. And Cleveland at 3 is on the edge of what you would want to lay, just because it's the Browns offense that you're needing to put up and cover margin. But on the other hand, we just saw the Bengals offense everybody wrote off go up and down the field on the Jags defense all night, with so much emphasis on that game for the Jags. Jay says, no Christian Kirk, big blow. Completely agree. Concur on the weather concerns. I think the weather sets up so much better for Cleveland than it does anybody else in this game, anybody on Jacksonville. I think it's just a much better matchup. I was distracted there by the Wilson comments that threw me off a little bit. Yes. Jags off overtime as well. Longer game. To me, this stacks up quite a bit. So give me the Browns in this spot. Pink Tiger says, how much value, if any, do you ascribe to Flacco over DTR? I do not. I don't know the proper way to use ascribe in that, but I know where you're going with that. Flacco's the best quarterback the Browns currently have on the roster. I think the gap is pretty significant between him and DTR, especially him and Walker. Historically, PJ Walker is, over the last decade, the worst quarterback that has been on an NFL field. I don't think DTR is much better. Flacco gives the Browns by far their best chance to win. and by far their best chance to resemble a reasonable offense on an NFL field. So Cleveland in this spot, for me, no thoughts on the total. That is going to be an ugly one. What I would say from a reference point, the Saints played the Browns in a game that had slightly higher wins and like equally bad conditions. I forget if that was last year or the season prior. That total closed 32.5. And so we're lower than that with the injuries to both sides. But Cleveland is the look for me in this one. Rams on the road at the Baltimore Ravens. This is a fun one to talk about. I like Baltimore in this spot. Ravens off of the bye. They have a really interesting defensive scenario that they can employ. And so we'll bring up SIS again, and I'm going to run through this quickly. So let's pull up the LA Rams offense and show you what we're looking at with LA on offense specifically. The big thing I want to highlight here, we know exactly what Sean McVay and this offense is. They run 11 personnel, which is 3 wide receivers, 93% of the time. It is far and away the highest usage percentage, and they're very successful when they do it. The 5th highest success rate. And this is exactly what you are going to get from the Rams every single time that they take the field. Now, let's pull up the Baltimore Ravens, because I think that this is a defense that's going unnoticed for what they do and how well they do it. This is, to me, the really interesting thing. So we'll just show the parameters here. This is against all offensive personnel types. So this is every offensive play ran against the Baltimore Ravens defense this season. The Ravens man and zone coverage usage are 14th and 19th. And I mean, this is like half a percentage separating both of these from being league average. And this is really unique to see, because typically defenses are skewed man or zone heavy. You seldom see a team that is split right down the middle like this when looking at their offensive plays as a whole. The reason that the Ravens are like this is because Mike Macdonald, the defensive coordinator, is always tailoring his game plan on a week-to-week basis, and has shown the ability to have games where he goes to a huge rate of man and shown games where he has the ability to shift into a huge rate of zone. This is why the Ravens defense on broadcasts gets so much praise and so much attention, because they're able to be so multiple in what they do and match up to opponents really well. Where this becomes interesting is if we deselect everything but 11 personnel for the Ravens defense, look at how well they're able to defend it from their top personnel groupings. And so they play with these 5 defensive backs at the 2nd highest rate. They're top 10 against it and allow a success rate of just 38%. And so the Ravens are so good at defending what the Rams always do on offense that when I'm looking at this matchup, it's like, are the Rams going to be the team to do something fundamentally different and switch? Or are they just going to walk into a matchup against the Ravens defense that is so great at what they do, and the Ravens are the unit that can actually switch, which gives them the best matchup advantage? And I think the latter is true. I don't think we see the Rams switch on offense and try to do something different, especially with Nakua not 100%. It just they don't have the pieces to do it. I think Baltimore comes out with a really strong game plan and switches their defense up to match up against the Rams, and we see them defend LA very, very well. We also have weather impacting this game as well. And so that obviously leads itself to the Ravens with Lamar, with their ground game, having a lot bigger of an advantage on offense. The Rams are not going to be able to go out and just consistently run the ball with Kyren Williams behind their offensive line against this Ravens defensive front. It's just not happening. So not only are the Ravens well equipped to defend the Rams' typical offensive personnel, which they run more than any other team in the league, but they're also going to be able to defend what the elements are doing to the Rams offense to slow down what that preferred offensive style of play is. And so for me, this looks like a good spot to be intrigued in Baltimore, as I think the matchups on both sides look up pretty well. And of course, you have Harbaugh with extra time to prepare, and the Ravens off of the bye facing a Rams team that just went a full 4 quarters against the Cleveland Browns. So looks like a really good spot to me for the Ravens. Connor says Stafford's passing yard prop is only 200.5, which tells you a lot. Is it actually that low? I haven't looked at any prop stuff yet. That's a very telling number if that is in fact the case, for sure. Nathan says any chance this gets to 6.5? Unless we see the total absolutely have the floor fall out of it and get into like the 37 range because the weather gets worse and worse, I don't see this getting down to 6.5. If it gets to 6.5, I'll certainly have a lot of intrigue in that too. But I think with the 7th, Pink Tiger, Ravens with a double-digit lead in the 4th quarter, what can go wrong? I believe they've had a 75% plus win probability in the 4th quarter of every game this year and haven't been able to close out. So you're right on that for sure. Lions on the road at the Chicago Bears. Hoi, hoi, hoi. This is a fun one. So Lions 3.5. There was very early money on the Chicago Bears when this was 5. It got bet down. There was another service that released on Monday morning on the Bears. Like, it's been all pro money on the Bears so far. The Lions are now down to 3.5. Detroit has a fundamental flaw within its defense that Aaron Glenn talks about. And it's a point that we've mentioned here a couple times on the stream. And that is defending mobile quarterbacks on the other side. They struggle at doing it. And when you look at Justin Fields in his career against this Detroit Lions defense, it's all bad. And right now, through 12 weeks on the season, what is really interesting to me is that the Lions really struggle defending the run. We know that. But what I want to pull up here, as we rely on SIS a couple times here, I wanted to do something just to break up the constant face versus viewer combination here. So this is the team leaderboard section. And so we'll isolate all running plays against the defense, and we'll highlight the QB runs and remove kneels. And we'll pull up teams defending quarterback runs so far this season. And when you look at, let's go like total yardage against, right? And if we sort by that conceded, we see the Lions here at 3rd. They're 3rd worst at defending the run, allowed 324 yards to opposing quarterbacks on everything but kneels. They've had QBs run against them in 12 games. But what really stands out to me is when I look at the Lions' schedule, they have not played mobile quarterbacks. So we want to highlight the game that they've had. For example, they played the Baltimore Ravens. So you have Lamar Jackson, a mobile quarterback. That was back in late October. And then they played Justin Fields on the 19th of November. Fields had almost 20 carries and ended up with over 100 yards. But the rest of the games on the Lions schedule has not been against teams that actively scheme and design runs from mobile quarterbacks. You look through the schedule and it's Geno Smith, it's Desmond Ridder, it's Jordan Love, it's Bryce Young, it's Baker Mayfield, it's Aiden O'Connell, right? There's not a lot of mobile quarterbacks that the Lions have faced, and still they're 3rd worst at defending quarterback runs on the other side. So the Bears have a clear path on offense for what they can do to really give this Lions defense trouble. What I start to wonder with now is we've seen this number adjust quite a bit from where we were in the first matchup. The first game had doubts between whether or not Fields could play, and that opened at 10. The true number that I would put on that game was right around 7.5, which is where we were when the market settled, when the Fields news came out. This is now a switch of venue. That game was in Detroit. We're now in Chicago. There is weather impact within this spot as well, which is going to force both teams to run the football a little bit more. We're now adjusted all the way to Lions 3.5. This is a Lions defense that not only struggles with quarterback runs, but is a really overrated unit as a whole. The injury to Anzalone is a huge one to monitor. He's the green dot within that defense. He's the communicator. You take him off the field for another week, potentially. That's going to be a problem for the Lions, who are going to have to defend the run in this spot. But I also believe that it's an equally big task for the Bears to defend the Lions' run game, even without Frank Ragnow. The Bears have been really good against the run, sneakily so, the last month and a half. as they continue to trend better and better. But I think the Lions getting to run and having Ben Johnson scheme against it in a weather game is an interesting spot. It is going to be cold, so you have the Jared Goff outdoors on the road, laying points, cold weather, all of that factor. Prediction is 37 degrees, 13-mile-per-hour winds, no precipitation, chance of flurries. And so it's this Midwest pocket of games that's seeing the weather improve a little bit versus where we were yesterday. Yes, so interesting spot. I don't have an opinion on the side or total at this current number, but there has been a lot of sentiment on the Bears so far from 5 down. Haven't seen the same at 3.5. I'll be curious to see if the Lions maybe take a little bit of money in this spot now between Wednesday morning and kickoff. I think that's the way that it might trend, especially if that weather gets a little bit better. Panthers on the road at the New Orleans Saints. Saints are 5-point favorites across the board right now. Total in this game is 37.5. Indoor game, but just two offenses that have a lot of questions. The Panthers were able to move the ball on the ground against the Buccaneers last week, but it took a lot of time and it took a lot of injuries. The Buccaneers ended up in the middle of the third quarter down their top 4 linebackers in the middle of the field. It's a very good Buccaneers run-stopping unit up front that the Panthers were able to exploit, not necessarily because of Panthers' skill or overwhelming ability, but because the Buccaneers were just depleted in the middle of the field. If the Panthers are able to go on the road into New Orleans and replicate it again for a second week in a row, I'd be a little bit surprised. I think this is going to be a tougher task to do it, especially after it was put out there and it was seen. The offensive output against the Panthers defense, even with Carolina getting guys back, I think was deflated because you had the Mayfield injury. We saw Godwin seldom used because of the neck injury that he suffered late in the week. But the Panthers might catch a bit of a break in that regard again, as the Saints are between Carr and Winston at quarterback. When you put Jameis Winston into a game relative to Derek Carr, you get a massive spike in potential variance, right? That's what Jameis brings with you. He brings with you the big play. He brings with you the big mistake. That's what you're going to be dealing with as a bettor on the Saints. I don't think in this game specifically, you want a lot of variance with Winston if you're arguing to bet the Saints. The Panthers are going to make mistakes over the course of the game, giving the Panthers potentially more opportunities to do something with the reckless abandon that Winston brings is probably something that could keep the Panthers competitive within the game longer than they should or need to be. If you told me that Derek Carr was healthy and starting in this game and this price was Saints -5, I would honestly be more intrigued to bet the Saints, even after betting the Panthers in a similar situation last week at the same number, just because I know that Carr is going to check down, he's going to get the ball out of his hand, and the Saints have a chance to move it without that back-breaking mistake that you might get from Winston. And so I would only be Saints or nothing in this game. I may do it either way. I think that the Panthers benefited way too much on offense last week against the Buccaneers with those injuries, that it's going to be a tougher task in this spot. So it's very likely a stay away for me, but I'm curious to see how this QB news settles. Again, I would be very surprised if Derek Carr plays. He had the second concussion now of the season. He has additional injuries, back, shoulder, ribs. I mean, he had a ton of designations within the injury report. I do think it'll be Winston. And I think that it adds an element to the game that I don't necessarily want to sort of get involved with necessarily in this spot. Michael says Allen is 5-16-1 as a favorite. That's pretty ridiculous. I did not know that either, but that's pretty impressive. Arthur brings up a question. Let's say someone bets a dime a game on NFL sides. Do you think it is smarter to bet that dime across player props instead? So, Arthur, does that mean you're going to be betting $1,000 per player prop? Is that what I'm understanding too? Or you have $1,000 total that you're trying to spread out? Personally speaking, the logic here is pretty simple, right? books have to offer dozens, hundreds of props per game across numerous markets. The chance of you finding a price that is off in props is much greater than you finding something off with sides or totals in the NFL. No question about that. The opportunity within props to win and find something better and to make a good bet is exponentially higher than what you're finding with sides and totals. Personally speaking, props this year and even last year, I have found to be incredibly difficult myself to find success with. There are so many people who are incredibly smart, whether they're bettors or they're coming over from the fantasy space, or they're really great with modeling and projections and trying to project out snap counts and usage that are competing within the space. Props are brutally difficult to try beat, in my opinion, at the moment as well. And so much of the great stuff that shows up is being bet immediately, very, very early. And it's really, really tough. Now, if you're just a bettor by yourself and you're trying to grind it out, props absolutely in that question. From kind of this position where it's sort of widespread advice and talking about games, and then into the service and what that is doing for an audience of several hundred people, talking about props and doing things with props where everybody has a fair share of trying to get it is really, really difficult too, just because of how these props are being treated by books and how they're being treated overall. I would also say with that bet amount that you're suggesting, you're obviously going to run into many more hurdles trying to bet that amount per prop at different books, especially if you're winning. Whereas obviously with sides and totals, you're going to be able to get whatever you want. But that in itself explains the differences between the two markets. And so if you're by yourself and you're trying to grind it out, props for sure within that question, no doubt about it. But personally speaking, I have found props incredibly difficult this year. Continuing on, Buccaneers on the road at the Atlanta Falcons. Falcons 2.5-point favorites. Total in this game is 39. Just before we came on the stream, I saw an update from the Buccaneers. Looks like Levante David was back at practice, and then Dennis, linebacker number 4, was back at practice as well. I went into this stream really confident that I would be talking about betting the over in this game at 39, because I could see a path for the Falcons to find success on the ground, just like the Panthers did. And then I could also see the Buccaneers being able to throw on this Falcons defense. There's two things that I'm kind of wrestling with here in my mind. The first of them being that the first game that these two teams played just a couple of weeks ago had Ritter starting, had Mayfield starting. There was 750 yards of offense in that game. And the game finished 19-16. It was a 35-point outcome. 750 yards does not produce 35 points very often. And the reason that that happened was because both of these teams had absurdly bad luck within the red zone. This game, to me, really represents what Tennessee Indianapolis did a week ago. Because usually in these divisional rematches, I played around the golf with one of the best NFL odds makers a year ago before the season kicked off at Paiute in Las Vegas. We're in the cart. We're talking NFL. His big piece of advice and his big thought was these divisional rematch unders are almost always a great bet. And that was his word. And you look at historically how these games tend to trend under, and it's significant. So anytime you see these divisional rematches, especially when it's more recent, you always in your mind, you're like, I like the under in this spot as default, just because it's been such an advantageous angle. But I look at that 19-16 game and I'm like, this is a game that should have had 47, 48 points. I look at this matchup and it's like, well, the Buccaneers linebackers aren't 100%. The Falcons are going to be able to move the ball. And on the other side, if A.J. Terrell is not 100%, the Buccaneers, they're going to be able to move the ball too and get what they want, just like both of these two teams did in the first match. It's a matchup that just leads to points, very similar to the Titans-Colts last week, where that first game was incredibly misleading. The total stayed under. There wasn't a big adjustment in the second rematch, and it just goes flying over because of how the two teams match up and the familiarity. I also look at the Falcons. They were pulling some really big under teams over the total over the last 2 months. that kind of goes unnoticed a little bit. Like they were getting bad quarterbacks and bad offenses into the mid to high 40s continuously. And the Buccaneers at the same rate were having really good offensive success rate outputs, but they were playing great defenses that were kind of stalling things out a little bit. And then last week, it was a Panthers team, which is the dead under, but the Buccaneers were playing with Mayfield at less than 100% and their number 2 wide receiver at less than 100%, both of which are expected to change this week. So to me, looking at 39, I think it's too short. And as much as these divisional rematch unders historically have come through and trended, I think you can only look at points within this circumstance in this one. Indianapolis on the road at the Cincinnati Bengals. Unfortunately, this over was just blasted. Was going to be one that I wanted to talk about here on the stream. This is now up to 43. There was a lot of concern about the weather in this game that brought this total down to 40. Cincinnati and their offense, we saw what they can look like against the Jacksonville Jags with Browning. I don't think that's a representation of what they're going to be going forward with that type of output, but it shows you what happens when there's a backup quarterback surrounded by a lot of great skill talent across the field, right? You saw Jamar Chase got a ton of attention. You saw T. Higgins back in the lineup. You still have Boyd. You still have Mixon. You've got Chase Brown, the Canadian, breaking out. A lot of good pieces on the Bengals offense, which is why they were Super Bowl favorites. You lose Burrow. You have the bad game against Pittsburgh. All of a sudden, there's the big offensive output against a good Jacksonville Jaguars defense. Now it's the Colts. You have Shane Steichen overs on one side that continue to fly over. You have him facing a Bengals defense that continues to get worse and worse every week that goes on. There's no safety help. They struggle against tight ends. They're letting wide receivers now get open at an alarming rate. The Lou Anarumo shine has continued to wear off week after week. You have sort of the Bengals as a team that's an over designation now. You have the Colts, who have been a dead over for a number of weeks. This was a low total because of the weather. Now the wind is clearing up. The rain is going to stop pregame. It's going to be a game where I think both offenses continue to have success. And the one thing I would say to wrap this up, the Bengals, they're experimenting a lot going into that Jags game. They wanted to see what they had with Chase Brown, who's a dynamic runner that goes unnoticed. Have to hype him up as the Canadian. For those of you who have the Right Angle Sports app, you have the 25-1 touchdown prop on him. Let's see. He was probably going to open at like 8-1 this week. Maybe that's being generous. Mixon just got so many red zone carries. But if they keep integrating Brown into the offense, that's a nice piece. They're trying to see what they have with other young wide receivers. It's an interesting offense going forward with the Bengals now and matched up against Shane Steichen. You can see why this gets hitting over, but very real over money on the Bengals Colts game in the last, honestly, 15 minutes that we have been on the stream. So absolutely decide within this. This is a win forecast that is very misleading in this game. Murray is what I would say. Was really high on Monday, dropped off yesterday, and now today we're still seeing it reported high. A lot of the advanced weather guys that I trust and read and follow are labeling this as the phony weather game of the week. And so with that now starting to circulate, you're seeing this total get bumped up and get bet over. Yeah, this is too bad. Brown 6-1. Man, is it that low, Connor? That's too bad. It sucks. Rarely do you get a guy at 25-1 like we spotted that gets so many touches, but also produces so many yardages, but never gets the chance in the red zone, which is exactly what happened to Brown. But watch out for Chase Brown. Could be a good week for Canada if Nathan Rourke gets time for the Jags. That could be interesting too. Thoughts on side fading the Bengals? Not really. Pass on that one. Texans on the road at the Jets. So I've been on the stream. Let's get to it now. I saw comments. Did they really announce that Zach Wilson is going to be the starter going forward, or were you guys just getting me riled up here on a Wednesday morning? I saw comments about it. Has that been made official? I should look at the phone. I have it on Do Not Disturb, but I have all the injury alert services. I have to check up on it. But you guys tell me. So if Zach Wilson is now the starter, it's a bump for the Jets. Oh, boy. Okay, so he's in. I did not think Tim Boyle could be as bad as Tim Boyle was, let alone be that much worse than Zach Wilson. And clearly now with this decision, it tells you what they think about Streveler. Brett Rippon, I have no idea what he is as well, but the Rams had him for one game, and McVay was like, get out of here. We don't want you. So Zach Wilson's the best option, I guess. This is high for Houston, I think, still at 5.5. Even with Wilson in as the starter. It is the biggest price the Texans have laid this season. They laid 5, and that's not true. They laid 5.5 at home to the Cardinals. They're now laying 5.5 on the road. That's going to be a big change for them, and I think that I think that that's too much. I like the Jets in this spot as a dog. Here's what I'll pull up that's an interesting thing to consider when you're looking at this. Let's go back to SIS. I think that this represents it really well. And again, we're pulling up some of this formation stuff. I want to change it and just kind of show some research things that I do during the week. So let's go back to the reports as a whole. I'll pull it up for the tendency report. Let's pull up the Houston Texans and let's look at their offense specifically. So what I like to look for when I'm looking at these tendency reports, when I'm looking at I need to get better at producing. Give me 1 second. When I'm looking at tendency reports, here's the Houston Texans. I'm looking for any team that has to go through a bit of a fundamental change on the field for a week, because otherwise this can get pretty noisy. And so here are the Houston Texans, and this is their offense. What I want to point out is their usage of 12 personnel, which is 2 tight ends on the field. They use it at the 31st highest rate. In other words, second lowest. They've had 61 snaps all season where they've had 2 tight ends on the field. That's an 8% usage rate, right? Houston does not use 2 tight end sets. When they do use it, 39% success rate, which is 22nd for the personnel grouping league-wide. Okay? The Texans don't use 2 tight ends. When they do, it's not very good. Houston lost Tank Dell, which was their best wide receiver. But when looking at what insiders are saying about what the Texans are going to do moving forward, when looking at what people who follow the team say is going to be doing moving forward, all of the calls this week off of the Dell injury is that the Texans are going to revert to using more 2 tight end sets because of the issues that Tank Dell brings in his absence. And I hear this, and it doesn't make sense to me, because not only does Houston not do it, but when they do it, they're very bad at doing it. And they have their best tight end, Dalton Schultz, still dealing with an injury that could miss this week. And so if this is going to be the case where there's an active effort to switch to using more of this, I think that the Houston Texans offense is going to stall out a little bit. Where I see this being problematic, if we pull up the Jets' defensive numbers and look at how they defend specific personnels, if we remove 11 personnel and look at what the Jets do against 12 personnel, right? Third, all these numbers here, 8th, 2nd, 9th, 7th, 1st. They're incredibly good at defending these types of personnels that Houston is allegedly going to be forced into running more with Tank Dell being hurt. And a lot of this just represents like the Jets, good defense, defend opponents well. A lot of these numbers are going to look good. But if there is this fundamental switch, you're now looking at it from a price perspective. You have the Texans off of another win against the Broncos with their price bumped up very high, now to 5.5. They're going on the road, playing in weather in New York, where it's going to be cold, it's going to be raining, it's going to be windy, and they're doing it against a defense that defends the switch that they may have to make very well. And you also have Robert Saleh, who obviously knows DeMeco Ryans very well, that now may be able to have a bit of an advantage considering their long history to maybe finally getting something going on offense. It's like there's just a lot of things kind of piling up here that make the Jets a little bit intriguing. So we have the Zach Wilson bump to 4.5. To me, 4.5 is fringe interest. But at this, based on who was betting the Jets yesterday, who I know, who has a ton of respect garnered within the market, the way that this is trending, the way that this looks, the weather, the situations, the changes for Houston, this could all lead to the Jets being more competitive than expected. So I could not bet Houston in this spot at this price. I think that the price is going to continue to go lower. I think we'll see it trend towards Houston 3 or 3.5. They have to stink for Zach Wilson to give your team a 1-point bump. I think it's not only the Wilson bump, if you want to call it that, but there's just a lot of other things that are at play here that are working against the Houston Texans. We're going to go through a couple games here a little bit quicker just to get to the last ones on the card as we're approaching an hour. So Seahawks, Niners, this was interesting to talk about on Monday when this was 12.5. As it sits right now at 10.5, I think that the price is right. And I think that the total is now right at 47. The first meeting between these two teams closed around the touchdown. We saw a significant bump up to 12.5 that represented the 49ers. I think that this is the Niners off of a massive win that they were fully bought into, now going back home in a divisional game against a divisional opponent that's kind of a do-or-die spot for Seattle. The Niners have a massive coaching advantage. They have a massive game planning advantage. They have a massive personnel advantage, but a lot of that now is fully priced in. And it was too much. It was too much at 12.5. We're now down to 10.5. I think the side is right. I think the total is right at 47 as well. So for me, Seahawks, 49ers, priced right on the side and the total. Vikings on the road at the Raiders. Minnesota, 3 -15 at Chris, 3 -15 at Bet Online, 3 -10 everywhere else. Total in this game is 40 or 40.5. Minnesota has yet to announce a starting quarterback. If you believe Rossini, she said that it is going to be Josh Dobbs. If you're trying to read through some of the coach comments and the personnel comments, you're probably looking at Nick Mullins. I think it's a split between the two, but at this point, I would be leaning more towards Dobbs than I would Mullins getting the start. I don't know. That's just the way that I'm sort of seeing it being reported. This is going to be the last chance for Josh Dobbs under center. What we know about Minnesota with Josh Dobbs, they're not scheming runs for him. He has 3 designed runs total in all of his starts, and that is 3 runs of 25 total. All of Josh Dobbs' rushing success has been on scrambles, a lot of it on 3rd and 4th down, a ton of luck behind those numbers. And so if it is Dobbs starting, he is going to have to figure out a way to either avoid rolling out to his favored side, which is the right, where he just operates basically half of the field, because he's going to be rolling right into Max Crosby. I think that's going to be a problem. If they're able to negate that and you have Mullins in the pocket and you're just forcing him to get the ball out, I could see it working with Justin Jefferson coming back. This Vikings offense with Jefferson back is going to change quite a bit. I think it's obviously a massive upgrade when you put him back in the lineup. This Vikings uptick that they've shown the last few games has been without Jefferson. And so to me, the Vikings need to figure out a way where Dobbs is not rolling into one of the best defensive linemen play after play after play and get the ball out to Jefferson. If they do that, the Vikings are going to win this game and they're going to cover the number. We're also going to see, I think, now the struggles of Aidan O'Connell start to come into sort of the forefront. There was a lot of hype around him starting early because of the preseason numbers that he put up. But you look at the EPA numbers, he's 30th in the NFL. There's not a lot of consistent, sustained offense with him under center. It's just 1 or 2 big plays a game that are disguising a whole lot of average and mediocre play that I don't think is fully being realized within the market. And so this Vikings defense, which is dramatically improved with Brian Flores, I think has a pretty positive advantage against the Raiders and against O'Connell. I think O'Connell's incredibly overrated relative to how he is viewed by the average bettor within the market. And I think that the Raiders are a team that are going to continue to slide. And the Vikings, with their defensive improvement and getting Jefferson back, deserve to be upgraded further than they are. So that's how I'm looking at this one. I like Minnesota. Broncos on the road at the Chargers. In my opinion, the most difficult game to look at of the entire week. We saw some pretty sharp under money earlier in the week on Monday, and that made a lot of sense when you're thinking about it. It's a Broncos team that is shifting to use a lot of heavier personnel. Sean Payton is essentially approaching this Broncos offense and saying, we want to reduce the variance as much as possible within the game. We want to slow things down. We want to get in the fourth quarter, and that's when we're going to kind of force the issue. And that's what we've seen them do the last couple of weeks. And when they're able to do it later in the game, it looks really good, especially coming back. And against the Chargers defense, you would think that if they go heavy and try to stay a little bit conservative like they have, they're going to be able to move the football. It's just not going to be explosive plays. It's not going to be moving the ball very quickly. It's going to be the Broncos holding it. On the other side, the Chargers are one of the most limited offenses in the entire NFL, even with Justin Herbert on their center. It's Herbert and it's Keenan Allen. The Eckler talk can go away. Eckler running with the football looks like Eddie Lacy running to the buffet, right? He's so slow, it's bizarre. He has fallen off. It's all bad with Eckler at the moment, and we're seeing bad defenses be able to scheme Eckler out of the pass game without much effort at all. And so this idea that Eckler is this dynamic pass-catching back out of the backfield is gone. Those days are over. They may return next year if he's healthier. Eckler is on trajectory to be a commentator somewhere very soon out of the league. It's an injury that continues to hamper him. I don't think we ever see Eckler return to the level that we have seen him at the peak of his career as this big fantasy darling that guys love. You're watching him on the field. He's not outrunning linebackers. He's not even outrunning defensive linemen at this point. Will he break off a big reception from a screenplay that is totally unblocked? Yes. But is he someone that is changing games for the Chargers on a weekly basis like he used to? No. And so the Broncos have an elite shutdown corner in Patrick Surtain that he is going to be on Keenan Allen as his main assignment. We have seen Surtain shut down some great wide receivers league-wide. I don't know where the Chargers are going to go for offensive output if Keenan Allen is schemed and taken out of a game. We saw the Patriots do it. Keenan Allen, 50-some yards total, just a handful of receptions. The Chargers end up with 6 points. They still covered incredibly, but this is tough for the Chargers offense. But again, you don't have a Broncos offense, pardon me, that's like running out and getting way ahead in games and blowing out opponents. And they've had a lot of turnover luck that's gone their way too. And so I get why there was the early under money. But in terms of sides and totals, I think, again, it's another game this week that is priced right. And I don't have an opinion on that one, side nor total. Bills on the road at the Chiefs. We saw Bills money come in just before we came on the stream. I want to try get involved with the over, but I don't think that I can do it at 49 or even 48.5. These two teams have played multiple times in the last few seasons, regular seasons, playoffs. Those games have all been lined in the low to mid 50s. And this game way lower, obviously in 48.5, 49, not something we've seen when these two teams play, but there's a couple things going on here. The first is that obviously the Kansas City Chiefs offense is struggling with communication to receivers to hit those big plays. We talked about it in depth a couple weeks ago. This is not a drops issue. It's a communication issue between Mahomes and these receivers. It's just the routes are not matching up with what Mahomes is expecting from his receivers, and it's leading to a lot of miscommunication and broken plays from receivers. And what it's also leading to is defenses dropping back, really forcing the Chiefs to operate much slower than they want to. Against the Packers, we saw 5 possessions in the first half. And that's becoming really common in Chiefs games where, because of the Chiefs' offensive disconnect, it's really kind of slowing things down for Kansas City. And when they do score, it's leading to these long 7, 8, 9-minute drives that, although they put points on the board, are just killers for overs. The Bills are doing the exact same thing. Even with the coaching change and OC, there still is kind of a governor on this Bills offense that is forcing them to move slower than they want. And so in this game from this total, you would like to think that, hey, both coaches do the optimal thing. And we see both of these teams open it up and get moving. This total's too short. I just don't know if it's going to happen. I think that we're going to see, again, the Bills, now that they're getting so much healthier on defense, really be able to kind of do what we saw the Packers do against the Chiefs and really slow down the offense. And on the other side, we're going to see the Bills kind of methodically move their way down the field as well as the Chiefs defend it too. The big issue for the Chiefs that we have to watch for, Is Nick Bolton going to be back? He's the green dot within the defense, the key communicator. We saw how big of an issue that was without Bolton on the field when Tranquill went down against the Packers. We've seen, I mean, that was as good as the Packers' run game with A.J. Dillon has looked in a long time. And that was simply because the Chiefs were missing so many key guys in the middle of that defense. And so Bolton's eligible to return. Let's see if he's able to go. We also have to watch what's going on with Tranquill. If you take both of those guys out, I think that's going to force the Bills to run more. I think they're going to take those opportunities on the ground. And again, that's just going to slow things down. So I could see a situation where this kind of gets throttled down and slowed down. And that worries me a bit from the total. So I'm going to pass on that one, pass on the side as well. If you think the Chiefs win this game, consider Chiefs 1 seed at 3-1. The Ravens and Dolphins play each other, but the Chiefs' schedule beyond this, very easy to run out. So if the Chiefs win this game, although they're playing from behind, I think they're in a bit of a driver's seat position to potentially get that 1 seed. You can get that at 3-1. Completely hinges on this game as well. So interesting look to consider there as an alternative. Eagles on the road at the Dallas Cowboys. Fun game to look at in this spot. We've seen under money come into the market. We are now down to 51.5. I thought one of the more insightful pieces of NFL content that we have seen all season long came from Mina Kimes yesterday, talking about how the Eagles have got so many different looks, specifically relating to cover one over the last couple of weeks, which has gone a long way to throttling their offense, who had a ton of opportunities last season when teams were throwing it at them. Last year, the Eagles played one of the highest rates of cover one defenses from opponents all season. This year, it's one of the lowest. And what teams are doing is they're dropping into cover two, and they're forcing Jalen Hurts to make these short, methodical throws. A.J. Brown has been a guy who's had a lot of explosive plays, but now that he has become so prominent, we've seen defenses really shift in how they're defending the Philadelphia Eagles. And what's interesting about this matchup against the Dallas Cowboys is, again, we'll go to SIS and we'll pull it up. So we'll go to the Dallas Cowboys and we'll look at their numbers, and potentially a path that you can see becoming interesting in this as well is when we look at the Dallas Cowboys defense as a whole and their one high shell usage. So they run this defense that the Eagles thrive against at the 3rd highest rate. And when they go to the 2 high shell, which Philadelphia has really struggled with in the last couple of weeks, this has been the big switch, right? When Dallas goes to that 2 high shell, we don't see the Cowboys do it all that often. And so what gets interesting within this matchup, especially with Dallas Goedert potentially coming back, the Eagles now have an option to beat these cover 2 looks that have been giving them so much trouble with Goedert back in the lineup. What the Eagles have been doing to try find something different, and this gets really interesting when you're looking at it. If we pull up the Philadelphia Eagles and we look weeks 1 to 18 at their usage overall on offense, we're seeing that it's primarily the 3 wide receiver sets with some 12 personnel mixed in. Not a lot of anything else going on. But if we go past the Goedert injury and we look at week 10 until now, we see the introduction of 10 personnel. No running backs in the backfield, empty sets, Eagles spreading it out, going with a ton of wide receivers. The Eagles have run it since week 10 on 35 snaps. That's more than any other team in the NFL. And they've had some success doing it, 57% success rate when they've gone to that specific formation. And what you see is without Dallas Goedert, their usage of multiple tight end sets has dropped to the 3rd lowest rate in the NFL because they just don't have guys out there. They don't have depth at the position to do anything with it. When we look at weeks 1 to 9, when Goedert was in the lineup for the Philadelphia Eagles, their usage was right above league average 23% of the time. And so Dallas Goedert has a massive impact on these Eagles offensive formations and what they want to do. If he's able to come back and the Cowboys switch into what gives the Eagles the most difficulty and what other teams have been doing to slow them down, that is going to allow Philadelphia to finally be able to exploit that something they haven't been able to do in the last 4 weeks of playing football without Dallas Goedert. And so I think that's an interesting shift as we're looking at this game, right? The Eagles, through a brutal stretch of schedule, have gone from a 3+ point favorite. It was about 3.5, 3.25 in the first meeting against the Cowboys. Now with the venue flip, that number's gone through 0 the other way, now to 3.5. But the Eagles potentially get their guy back that can switch this offense and make them a lot more comfortable. And you have a matchup against the Cowboys defense that, if the Cowboys play how they usually do, that's an offense, or that's what the Eagles offense likes to exploit. And if the Cowboys shift, they're doing something they don't do often, but now the Eagles have an answer to beat. So to me, the status of Goddard is incredibly important within this matchup. And I think if he plays and you see 3.5, you got to look at the Eagles at this spot getting the points. Nathan says, I like the Eagles at 3.5. I agree. One last thing I'll end this with. Mike McCarthy's having surgery today, blew an appendix. He's been getting away with a ton in games. He's been guessing right. He's been getting late game scenarios right, despite making some bizarre decisions. It's been a run for the Cowboys against opponents where everything has been comfortable. McCarthy has not been forced to really make any key calls that have huge impacts on games. He's been getting everything right. The expectation is that McCarthy, despite having surgery, is going to be out there on Sunday. This is kind of silly, but I wonder just a little bit, is having surgery on Wednesday for appendicitis potentially something that is going to disrupt the prep and mindset for McCarthy enough where we finally see the old Mike McCarthy with his in-game decision-making, maybe not as sharp and great as he has been the last couple of weeks in a tight game within the division, finally crumble and make those mistakes that we're so accustomed to seeing him do in play, especially later in the game when the stakes are the highest. It might just be enough to kind of derail it a little bit within this spot. And so to me, I look at the Eagles here getting 3.5 if Goddard is in, primarily because of those offense versus defensive matchup advantages. That's what interests me the most. That's what I would look at. And then you kind of have this coaching angle on the side as well that could stand out. Last note, I remember one more thing. The first game, Hurts didn't run a lot. It was right after he got hurt recently. He looked a lot different to me in that Niners game running the football knee-wise and leg-wise. So I think that stands out too. So I would look at the Eagles there at 3.5, especially with Goddard in. Have to cut the stream off as I have an ESPN interview in 3 minutes. We have 2 games on Monday Night Football that are not overly interesting. I don't have any thoughts on Miami and Tennessee at that current price. I just 13 is not a number that I want to get involved with Miami. I could never find my way into backing Tennessee. In that late game, well, I guess they're both at the same time, but the last game on rotation, Packers at 7 at Chris. If that gets to 7 consensus, I would back Green Bay, or I'd back the Giants at home getting the points. I think this is a week where there's a lot of ugly teams that are now gone too far that are presenting some value, and I think the Giants fit in with that category. So if that gets to 7, I would back the Giants in that spot. Watch for Watson, the injury news with Green Bay. This is now absolute peak Packers off of that win Sunday night on the road. I would definitely look at the Giants in that spot getting 7. So that's how I would look at those 2 Monday games, but perhaps we'll do a little bit more and catch everyone up to date as we get through it. So with all of that said, a lot to look at and digest within this. Saw a comment here about the use of SIS. I lost a comment within the feed. Here we go. Zach Moss. I love when Adam gives us a taste behind the scenes with how he looks at SIS. Fantastic material. If you like the breakup and using that with different video overlays and things like that, leave a comment in the video down below. I'll keep doing it. I'll try to do better at it as I'm clicking. It's hard. You got the one mouse, you're clicking back and forth. So maybe it's not as great within here, and graphics wise, it kind of is a little bit abrupt. But just something that I'll try keep doing if people like it and give you a little bit more insight to what I'm looking at and kind of how the matches look at and describe and break down. So that's how I look at week 14 in the NFL. Reminder to everybody, the bowl season subscription is live, raspicks.com/CFB. Highly recommend everybody getting over to raspicks.com/CFB. Get the bowl subscription. Ton of games to come out in the next week or two. Appreciate everybody stopping by. Thanks for joining the show this Wednesday morning. We'll see you back next Wednesday at 9:15 a.m. Pacific. And if you like the video, you like the breakdowns, you take some value away from this, consider hitting the like button and the subscribe button down below. Have a great week, everybody. We'll chat to you next Wednesday.